Welcome, everyone, to another episode. I'm Chris Watson. And if you love psychology and understanding human behavior, you are definitely in for a treat. Brian is probably one of the best person to talk to when it comes to understanding what makes visitors tick on your website and become customers, from understanding also what drives human emotion, understanding the power of colors, how that can potentially impact your store and even your dating profile, the us versus them principle, how massively impactful and powerful it is, and potentially damaging if you do not use it the right way. So you need to make sure you're using this wisely. We also cover some brainwashing techniques. So it's fair to say that this episode is very, very valuable. So without further ado, I'm very excited to share this value with you. Let's dive right in. Right. So today we have the honor of having Brian Kugelman, behavioral scientist, specialized in applying psychology and data science to digital products. Also, a lot of us that are in the CRO space or the optimization space, we probably would have seen Brian a couple of times because he's got an entire course on CXL with digital psychology and behavioral design. Brian's career, that is well over 2 decades. So it's very safe to say that we've got a lot to learn from you today. So I'm really excited. And for anyone that wants to learn how to influence behavior online, you're definitely in the right place. So Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
And like I said just now as well, with initially our first 15-minute conversation turned into 2 hours or 1 hour and a half. So I'm really excited for this conversation. And I think for anyone who maybe doesn't know your story or doesn't have like the full context yet, I think it'll just be interesting to go like really big picture. And if we can just have a little explanation of your journey and how everything basically began.
Sure. I'm a person of conscience. So early on in my career, I decided I needed to save the planet. I thought the best way to do was to get people to act in a sustainable way. So that led me down like a long track in my life where I went to the environment and then found myself working in social change. And before behavioral economics was became the trendy approach to behavior change, we used to have another field called social marketing. That was the translation of classic marketing to social causes, but it was like classic 4Ps marketing. And then I used that as my framework, and that's how I got into behavior change. Soon ended up working in social advocacy and broad social change. Worked in the UN several years, running global campaigns and trying to nudge the entire planet in a few different areas, and volunteerism, and then climate change for a few years. I got bored, did a PhD on how to use technology to get people to act more sustainably and to preserve our future on the planet. And that's when I dived really deep into the psychology of what drives behavior. So my doctorate, there's a few subjects that we'll probably talk about. I studied credibility and trust for an entire year. And then I did a much broader research project after where I went out to measure all the major behavior change principles that could be used online, put them into a taxonomy, and then after I graduated, I started up Alter Spark, my company, and then the Behavioral Design Academy later. And I was basically working in consulting, studying projects, seeing what was working, not working, and then a lot of training. Training took over, but we also used to deliver projects for governments and small organizations at the same time, pretty broad scale. And that's sort of how I got into it. And then I could tell you how I got specifically into conversion design, because I remember when conversion was not a concept and when it became a concept. And I happen to have been working early on just as conversion came up and hit the market, but maybe that's another story.
I'm very glad that I don't need to explain my story, because yours is so interesting, and there are so many, a couple of points you mentioned that we're going to talk about today, but I think it would be interesting. You said a little bit about training took over. I was just curious to think then because obviously you must have people from very different levels, is how much do they know about using, for example, behavioral science? What's the difference between teaching someone who knows nothing about it or who's really at the beginning of their journey? And then when you've got people that are a lot more advanced, or maybe even companies, they want to incorporate it a little bit more. How do you sort of approach those two different situations?
Yeah, and actually, that's a classic dilemma for any teacher, right? So, how do you teach any subject when some of your students are super advanced and others, they don't even know what you're talking about? So, I had to deal with that when I started, providing teaching to the market. And the only way you can really do it is to start right from the beginning.
Okay.
But you can, if you do it in a very good way and you maybe provide a framework that other people don't know, and you're upfront, you tell people, look, if you do have knowledge on this, some of this might seem repetitive, but don't worry, we're going to get past this mark, fairly quickly, and there's a lot more we can bring to bear on it. Also, a lot of people who are pretty advanced on a subject or have a certain amount of knowledge, they're normally okay to, revisit the basics. Like, I don't want to get too far off track, but I'm a drummer, and my grandfather taught me how to play the drums formally. And if there's any question of that, there you go.
Yeah,
it's
right there.
swing drum set from the 1950s.
Nice.
So I was taught formally how to drum, but throughout my, my drumming career, I always go back and practice the basic rudiments. So people who are advanced are all right to go back. So you just, if you can develop an effective training system, you can present concepts to people that help beginners understand things much quicker. And with the right exercises, you can help people come up to speed quickly. And you can also keep the more advanced people up to speed. And then at some point, you'll get your class roughly to the same mark. Also, everything I do is grounded in science, but I use a lot of fun exercises and engaging experiential learning, because you can't preach to people how the world works and what's right and what's right. They won't believe you, right? Even if you have all the credentials. I know, like I have good credentials now, and I have pretty impressive clients, but at some point I had none of that, and even when I would say the same thing, I know that it's easier now than it was back then. But even still now, a lot of people, they won't be swayed by that. So, yeah. But experiential learning, good. And that's not a bad way of keeping the more advanced students engaged. Okay. Now they're learning the same subject, but from a different perspective. So that worked for me. I have a toolkit of techniques I'll bring out when I have that problem.
I think that's really interesting. I heard something the other day. I think it was from Naval Ravikant, and he said he's not a big fan of the school system, because he says you basically just learn at the speed of the dumbest student in a class. So for people that know more, maybe it's a little bit slow. But obviously, if it's a specific subject, like you're doing, I guess it's always good to go back to the fundamentals and also to the basics. But I like what you're saying, where you go through the most important fundamentals. It's a good reminder for people that already know it. It's good for the new ones to learn it. And then you pick up basically where everyone sort of has the same level of knowledge. A sort of side question, actually, I was just wondering, as you were saying, that now you've got more impressive clients, everyone has to start off at the beginning where you've got no proof of, the work you're doing. You don't really have any trust, which I'm sure is also, a conversation or a topic we're going to mention, how important that is on the website. But the topics you mentioned, I guess, are quite niche. They're not very mainstream, or is not everyone talking about it. How did you actually go about getting your first clients and getting that first big client when at the beginning you didn't have all that experience and knowledge in the field?
Yeah. So, I guess there's different stages. So I actually did end up starting my own consulting businesses fairly early.
Okay.
But I think, obviously people build up to some level of credibility in most things they do. Normally you don't just start off, declaring yourself an expert, putting up your sign with zero education, zero experience. Normally you've got something. And so if you're fairly honest about, your background and what you're doing, you'll almost always find people who are willing to give you a shot,
Nice.
A lot of it has to do with marketing. So if you knock on enough doors, you're going to get some response. Sometimes you have to lower your prices. You have to build your credibility. You have to basically get out there and hustle. And so, when I was younger and earlier in my career, I did what many people do. So, you've got your education. You if you don't have any experience, I volunteered. So I was in school. I was like working in irrelevant jobs where I did not want to stay for very long. And I would volunteer. And in fact, I met people. I got relationships. I got my first hands dirty in the workforce, and you just keep pounding away. And I think if everything you do is pointing you in the same direction, and you're always making progress in almost everything you do, and you don't let yourself get distracted, you will start banking up the basic credibility and trust and insight required. And I found like whenever I want to dive into a totally new area, I will sometimes do pro bono or very cheap work just to get those case studies and that experience. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you shouldn't start your own business. You should work for someone else for a while. That's obviously a much easier way to get going. And actually, I regretted not doing that in a few areas.
Okay.
I think like when I started my agency, I think if I had worked agency side a couple of years, it would have been a lot smoother.
Why do you think that?
People work in the agencies, they have fairly effective like routine processes that they work with. You get coached when you're working in any environment as well. Like there's a lot of jobs where maybe, you come in, you do your job and you leave, right? But anything in sort of the creative space, the digital space, it's normally not like that, right? Like you don't, show up, turn something around and leave. Right. You're learning a lot. There's a lot more interaction. It's far more like complex and dynamic. It's not a factory where you're doing mindless routine work. There are almost always tricks of the trade in every industry. Like even let's forget like say agency side conversion work or digital marketing area. Like even in academia, like getting a PhD is obviously you have to be dedicated and motivated and, spend the time to understand your subject matter. But there is a political game to be played as well. You need to know the publishing game. You need to know the politics and you have to navigate them. I mean, politics is part of everything.
Yeah.
And I think for almost any area of practice, there are skills that you will learn that will help you have success when you have to sort of hit the road on your own. So that's just part of like my practical advice. And I haven't said anything about networking and actually, being known in the industry and having relationships and people who trust you, and that's also something you get while you're working in the industry.
Okay.
And actually knowing when you win clients, knowing who's not incompetent and will destroy your reputation is sort of a helpful thing to have. And if you haven't worked with enough people in large communities and also in an entire like industry, you don't know who to go to. And every hire is a game of Russian roulette, which is not a great way to run a business.
That's very interesting. And I agree with you because, there's just so many things that you just don't know, or maybe mistakes that can either cost a lot of money or a lot of time. You can just avoid it by being within an agency. Like you said, from my time now that I've been with ConversionWise, I've learned already so much how an agency works. Like you say, you speak with your own, so, the clients that you're working with, you see what works, what doesn't, how to do effective communication, what to avoid. And what I've learned, I would say in 6 months, for example, it would have probably taken me, had I decided to start my own agency, who knows, like maybe years, maybe it would have completely destroyed my reputation at one point. So I think that's very, very valuable. It's maybe just a bit difficult sometimes, especially in, today's day and age where everyone wants everything immediately, to think, okay, let me just slow down for a couple months, maybe a year or two. Let me learn everything. And then maybe I'm better off alone. So I think, like you're saying, that's a sort of really a good approach, just to make sure that in the long term as well, your reputation also stays intact,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, so it sounds like you're you're playing the wiser path that maybe I didn't take and have had a different experience.
Just trying to learn everything I can. But I'm thinking, okay, if, for example, because there are a lot of different aspects on the digital marketing side, the psychology, the persuasion, two topics that you often talk about are digital psychology and behavioral and also I would say UX design. If we dive in a little bit deeper inside of these topics, if you could just briefly explain from your point of view, digital psychology and behavioral design, how you sort of see those two topics and how you approach them.
Sure. Maybe I could talk about one of the shocking learning experiences during my doctorate, and also one of my failures.
Okay,
So
let's go.
I started a doctorate, and my goal was to identify the psychology of technology that could be used to build, better online campaigns and products for engagement. I was more interested back then in like environmental and social causes, and then I ended up going into health. But I had a problem because I couldn't find the magic taxonomy of all the behavior change principles that have been proven to work online. And here's the problem. Like today, we take a lot of things for granted that when I started my doctorate in 2006, people didn't even think that this was possible. So okay, this will probably sound crazy to you, but back then, people did not think that psychology worked online. Like, oh, it only works in print or television, but not in the digital environment. They thought that digital had like no impact on people. And then in around 2006, we started getting the conspiracy theories about, oh, now social media is destroying the world and what's going to happen to us. And it was like, so it went from total skepticism to total paranoia, which is normally how humans like to oscillate. Not in between, they just jump around on the fringes.
Yeah, extremes.
And so I had to do a doctorate in this environment on a subject that most people didn't even think was real, and then other people thought was the evil decay of society.
Just before we go more into that, how did you actually then stay motivated, or I would say interested in the topic, where some people maybe told you like, this doesn't even exist, you're wasting your time. Maybe some people said that. How do you think, okay, let me just continue actually these studies?
Yeah, actually, exactly like how a lot of the early people who were doing conversion rate optimization did it. Mm-hmm. They had the data and they knew. Yeah. And actually, when conversion, I'll just jump off just to continue this. But when conversion rate optimization came up, some of the people in it had already been doing it for 10 years. It was when it became trendy, it was actually an old subject, but it was never popular. Okay. And so for me, working in behavior change and psychology and social marketing and some of the other behavior change fields at the time, I had the data and I knew it worked, and so did the CRO people, but everyone thought we were crazy. So I like them, but they were down a totally different track, and our paths met later on. Mm-hmm. So this is 2006. So I knew that it was a viable path. I had data. Everything I had been doing in the workforce was so successful. I had like incredible job security. When I left one UN agency, they had to hire 2 people to replace me. They had to hire a full systems engineer and a journalist to cover what I was doing before.
That must be good for you to say you were doing so much work to replace you that you hired 2 people.
Yeah, it was good bragging rights for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so then at the time, I knew there was something there. But sorry, now I didn't want to go too far off track, but maybe to go back. So at the time, no one knew if psychology worked online or not. And you would never say that now, but that was actually the case. So my doctorate, my first challenge is I had to prove that you could even use psychology online.
Okay.
So
how do you approach that? How do you prove that?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of literature coming up. So it was brand new. Like I was in early, right? And I had the data from the workforce, and scientists were just doing this. So what had happened is it was actually, the literature was really skimpy in most places. So actually in the area of trust and credibility, but mainly in trust, there was actually about a decade of research from e-commerce already in place when I started. But the e-commerce and the behavioral science literature. And actually, no one even used the word behavioral science back then. That's if you're a behavioral scientist, you were you're basically working in a medical faculty and you're providing clinical services. It's not like today's I don't even always use the term because I'm still old school, but
Yeah.
it has a different meaning now.
It sounded like it was very misunderstood back then. When you heard that term, people maybe sort of, yeah, it wasn't what you just described, but it was just so misunderstood. But again, you had the data to have the confidence of thinking, okay, I'm on the right track actually. But so you said trust and credibility. Did you use those two elements to try and prove that it actually worked to use psychology and persuasion online?
Actually, I did, and maybe I could bring one other dimension in. So trust and credibility had a ton of great research in e-commerce and marketing, but then there were all these other areas, and so many of the different psychological principles were getting little small studies. So I remember a master's student had published a paper on the foot in the door technique
Okay.
on through email. And I remember that was one of the first things saying, oh, okay, good. So here's one. It works online just as it does offline. Okay, that's not. And then you would go topic by topic. And so, well, the trust literature was solid because there was money attached to it. All these other subjects were just sort of bubbling up and they're coming in slowly. And then like things like cognitive behavioral therapy and different health models were starting to slowly get tested. And then BJ Fogg's work, which was focused mainly on online credibility. That was sort of starting to get absorbed by the market. And so what I did is, to get a doctorate, some people want to get a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that. But when you actually start on it, every professor around you says, just focus and get out of here. You're going to run out of money. It's going to deplete you. You need to move on. Get your doctoral thesis. So I decided to go for a quick win, and I actually used trust and credibility online. And I looked at how credibility and trust operated in online environments. And what I did might sound a bit crazy, but it makes sense when you understand the psychology of how people interact online, is I used a human model of trust and credibility and compared it to a computer model.
As in, like maybe a doctor in a doctor's, like uniform compared to a computer saying this supplement, for example, helps your overall health. Is that what you mean, or is it something different?
Yeah, well, maybe that's a way of representing the presentation. So does a human type representation persuade someone more than like, say, a analytical, like an algorithm telling you, you completed question 1, question 2, therefore you should do X or so. So that's the representation. But the other there are different, when it comes to trust and credibility, of course, I think I know what the core essence is, but when you go into the market, there's like 20 academics saying, no, my model. No, it's my model. This is the truth. Right. And most people don't know what to do unless they've gone in and taken a look at the data. And you're like, okay, I don't know about those ones because I know that they fall apart the minute you put them to numbers. So this is looking at actually the scientific research on human celebrity endorsers versus whether you trust a product. So if I don't know if like say I pick up my phone.
Yeah.
So there's models of why I would feel that this is a better phone than another phone based on its physical attributes. Okay. So that would be a technology model of credibility.
Sure.
Right. And then you can apply that to websites and physical products and anything you build. And it sort of gets into product design. And then the other is a human celebrity endorser. So the person who says, I love this phone. Yeah. You should buy one too.
Yeah, exactly.
So then it's the human you're testing, not the product. So I compared the two, human versus the computer. I'm now sort of going back to then earlier question of like, does psychology work online? And what the heck is it? Even people didn't know what it was. And then in that process, I really became firmly committed to the idea that human technology psychology is just a derivative of human to human psychology. It's the same thing. So the impact that you have on me and I have on you and every other person has on every other person, that's what's largely going on when a computer persuades you or when an interface persuades you or an app or a landing page or an ad or anything.
I mean, I could like you said, it's very difficult to believe that people didn't accept the idea that psychology could work, online. Because maybe you could just think, I'm looking at a screen, I'm at home, or I'm just behind a computer, or I'm on my phone. It's not going to impact me in any way, shape, or form. Nowadays, we know it works, so it just sounds obvious. But I could understand you saying, well, it only works if I have someone in front of me and not, behind my screen. But you touched on a lot of interesting points there. I'm just thinking, like, for example, I think we've all seen the typical sort of urgency countdown timer, where maybe a lot of shipping stores had that. It's a 24-hour discount, and if you don't act on it now, you're never going to get the same price. Yeah. Shock, the next day you go on the same website, and again, they have, 24 hours, So
yes, yeah.
A lot of people, they know that sort of technique. I'm thinking, will trust and credibility when you show, as mentioned in, for example, some press companies or Trustpilot or 5-star reviews.
Yeah.
Do you think that at one point that will also sort of fade away and it will lose its effect? Or does it have such a strong impact on the way people see a website that it's always going to have, to like different extents, an impact actually on the way people trust maybe the website they're on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of effects that can fade over time, and and their efficacy. Like, you actually see the studies when the pop psychology gurus are telling you use this technique or that. Yeah. They're like they overestimate its effect, and they treat it like an eternal impact, right? Yeah. But the reality is impacts are normally way lower than you expect, and their curve over time is like, yeah, a lot of them nosedive pretty quickly.
Exactly.
But trust and credibility are different. So they're sort of core to survival. So it's like you could think of like trust and credibility as something that's relevant to an amoeba, like not just your customer. Yeah. So it's the basic, most rawest of emotions, where if you do something dangerous, right, some harm can come to you. And if you do something safe, you're most likely going to get something that you need for your survival. So when you measure trust, right, you actually measure it different. Like every type of psychological phenomena, depending on its broad grouping, you'll measure in a different way, and there's different techniques that you learn, like say a cognitive bias. Cognitive biases you measure it's more like an IQ test when you run them. They're sort of like intellectual tests or logical testing. That's like for cognitive biases. Psychometric susceptibility to different persuasion techniques are more like you'll use Likert scales and psychometric indicators, and often you can get them through questions, a little bit qualitative, but trust you almost always want to measure on scales. It comes very quickly. It's processed faster than other emotions. It's triggered through visual signals, like instantly. I forget the milliseconds for trust formation in websites, but a lot of it's impacted by visual design. Trust is really shaped by a lot of superficial factors as well. And maybe I could throw in something. It's probably one of the weirdest sounding things. And you often know a good scientific theory because it's so counterintuitive. You're like, that's too crazy. But
okay, and then it's good. Okay,
yeah. Then you're like, okay. Then some of them they sound implausibly surreal, but others are like, oh, that's interesting. Let's take a look, because that doesn't make any sense. And then you see there's something to it. But so one of the models of why humans read another person's personality is to make a judgment about whether they're a person of integrity or not. There's a few studies that make the case that what the human brain does is it keeps a catalog of all people and their behavior in every context. And when the behavior matches the context, you're like, okay, boring. You don't even notice what's going on. But when they have a major deviation from what's normal for the context, then you're like, huh, something's going on. So that's like a bit different. And the things we call personality traits are often those human traits that vary from context to context. And the argument is that the reason why we pay attention to people's personality and we notice incongruency or inconsistencies of behavior in specific contexts is it gives us those innate emotional feelings of trust or distrust in a person,
Right.
that something's not right here. I don't know what it is, but I don't feel good.
Okay.
And it triggers distrust in our person. And so consider that from this perspective, the brain does quantitative analysis of
Okay.
personality, makes a trust judgment, and you feel that instinctually in a fraction of a second.
Right.
And so for everything I work on, trust is the most central and most important factor. And it's something that doesn't wane. But once you win it, it can persist. And once you lose it,
Yeah.
it can persist. So you normally want to get classified pretty quickly as the trustworthy as opposed to the not trustworthy, because you might not get a second chance on that one.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it persists, it seems.
I can imagine that once you lose trust, or not even that you lose it, because that would imply that you actually gained it, but that you seem not trustworthy right from the beginning, I can imagine it's very, very difficult to actually gain it at that point. Maybe a dumb question, but when you're considered to be untrustworthy, you said the brain analyzes it, the personality, and just wants to make sure, okay, can I trust this person or not? And once it notices something where it's like, okay, this person, this situation isn't to trust, is it survival instinct sort of kicking in, like I'm not safe here, or is it something different?
No, I mean, I guess no one has like the full answer, but I would agree that it's survival instinct. That
Okay.
it really is. It's the core decision that most living things that have some like nervous system or intelligence system, have to make on anything. Is this safe or is it dangerous?
Exactly.
And that's it's you don't want to make a mistake on that one. You don't want a false positive, or
True.
if
Exactly, because that can happen as well.
or yeah, you can misjudge a safe situation,
Yeah.
right? Think it's safe, but it's actually dangerous, and then that's quite lethal. And you can take a dangerous situation and think it's safe, and that's not lethal. So you
Yeah.
can see how evolution has most likely played a role in making this so innate,
Yeah.
not just in us, but anything that's here today on planet Earth that has survived.
Definitely. Like I said at the beginning, where there's this sort of people expect something that it only works offline and it doesn't work online, like psychology again. The way we judge someone's personality when we meet them, you said you instantly or within a fraction of a second, you're like, okay, I can or I can't trust this person. Is it the same, like you said, on a website where immediately you're a bit like, can I trust this website? Yes or no? And if that's the case, would you say, some of the most common mistakes websites make
Mhm.
when they come across as untrustworthy, and how can they correct those mistakes?
Yeah, they absolutely they carry over. They're largely the same thing. They operate maybe a little bit differently because the medium of human to human interaction is different from any mediated experience
Mhm.
where you're dealing with other people through some channel, whether it's the internet, whether it's like movies, graffiti, smoke signals, Morse code.
Yeah,
There, like there's a human on the other end. Nowadays there may very well not be, but
true.
traditionally
Yeah, that's cool.
you you would assume that. Um, and also by extension, maybe I don't want to get too far out, but just to keep it tight in the psychology, there's even views that this is the genesis of belief in religions and other ideologies. So it's like if we do certain things, for if we give the sacrifices to the gods, good things will happen to us, and we'll have fruitful crops. So it's not just mediated things, but it's also reading into nature
Mhm.
and seeing patterns all around. But
Yeah.
let's get back away from that more speculative area and go to websites. So a lot of the early research on trust and credibility did deal with this. And there are a few like sort of classic findings from this. So obviously, there was a lot of research on superficial visual design. And if things look appropriate for the context, right, they tend to be more trusted. So, I mentioned our brains taking statistical stock of, is this behavior appropriate for the context? Well, what happens if you're a medical product brand and you don't have medical product branding? And in fact, your branding, it looks like you're whatever, I don't know, selling paintball fighting or something, or skiing, right? Like it looks like a coffee shop or something like that. So you're not going to look appropriate for the context. So you're going to lose some level of credibility like that way. So it's not just the visuals, but the appropriate visuals. So is it the color scheme that's congruent or consistent with the market, right? Professional versus non-professional design is also a factor. But when I say professional, probably a better way of saying that is, again, design appropriate for the context. So sometimes you want to have like if you're like doing marketing to the arts community, right? You're going to be like the snooty upper class arts or the down to earth sort of grungy style, right? And so you'll play around with your design. And while one might look very like polished and slick, and another might look sort of like more grungy, it's appropriate for the context. And there's this one classic example of the worst website in the world, which I actually think is one of the greatest websites, of Ling's Cars, who comes up a lot in the conversion industry. But you look at it, it's this trashy website with crazy colors. And then you look at it and you're like, actually, it's brilliantly balanced with its colors. And it's a fun expression of the personality of the person. So there it's like it's inappropriate, but it's appealing to the the brand and the persona, and it's fitting in consistently. So the idea of good, I just don't want to say, like, some people assume like good design means, I don't know, it's like they've got some idea of good, but a professional design normally have things like color balance, usability in it, visual properties that make it very easy to understand, even though it might look very different from what you expect. So, but it's appropriate. So it's that. There's two broad areas of credibility that matter most. So one is integrity of a person, and the other is like their competence. So often on any product, you have to clearly establish those. So are you a brand that has integrity? So that's something that's going to come onto the website. It should be, that one's a little harder to establish because it comes through your track record. I generally advise people the best way to appear credible is to be credible. So there's no better way of establishing your integrity than establishing a company with integrity.
So I was just going to say, let's say it's a brand, they're not it's not a massive brand yet. How can you show your integrity when you don't have, let's say you're a massive brand and you helped plant a lot of trees, you're helping maybe with cancer, every purchase has a certain donation. I mean, those are great ways of showing, certain integrity and the mission sort of that the brand stands for. Let's say you're a beginning or you're a brand and you're not very big yet. How can you show your integrity other than just being, a person of integrity? How can you be transparent on that, or what are ways you can show more of your integrity without people having to do all of the digging for that?
Yeah. So you got cut off a little bit, but I think I heard most of this.
At what point did I get cut off?
I think I lost about 10 seconds or so.
So I'll just repeat the question. And I just said, for a brand that is just starting off, how can you show that you're a brand of integrity when you don't have that proven track record? And the only thing you have is you're a person of integrity, but it's maybe difficult to show that in the online space, especially at the beginning when you're competing for, attention and people have so many different options. How can you actually show that as a smaller brand?
Yeah. So integrity is something where being a company of integrity, it's going to rub off in multiple domains. So some of it, might be tactical and little things that you can do, but a lot of it will be felt throughout the product and will come in. So it will include things like, do you have ethical return policies or refund policies or trial policies? Do you call people back in a timely manner? Are you able to start banking up client testimonials that seem like really sincere, where people appreciate it?
Yeah.
When you interact on social media, are you trashing people, or you can push back against criticisms online, and if you're doing so from a common ethical place, I actually think people will feel that. If you're pushing back from a common unethical place, people will obviously read into that pretty quickly as well. And that's something that it takes a while to establish that, and that's one of the harder ones, because and it's just like with a person, right? Like I'm sure everyone listening has been stabbed in the back many times in their life, right from kindergarten up until the present day, right? From people and companies and brands that they thought that they could trust, or that they had a natural feeling of confidence with, right? And if anyone has had that with people who are systematically dishonest, like narcissistic, sociopathic, psychopathic people, who are and not everyone with those traits actually is unethical, right? Like a lot of people, we all have those traits to some degree, and they vary in the population, but some people are very unethical who are dominant in those areas.
Okay.
But if you've been in an exploited position by someone who's very good at winning confidence, you realize, how it's a bit dangerous sometimes to give your trust. And so because of that, trust is obviously like harder to establish, and that integrity is harder to establish. A lot of people, they don't trust marketers, right? They unbridled, like if you're to let an AI loose on conversion optimization, I think it would be lying pathologically in about 3 A/B tests or something.
Anything
like
just
that.
to get a sale, definitely.
Yeah. And so a lot of people are very, distrustful. And so it is hard. The point is it's hard. So unfortunately, it's time and your track record and your time in the market, exposing people to you and letting them interact as much as possible. You might have to do a lot more public relations work, more like, public speaking and getting out there and sort of building that personal trust.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when you're starting out in a business, from my experience, you as a human will always outsell your brand, right? Because you don't have a brand that has any trust or credibility attached to it. You have yet another new logo, and there's no feelings of confidence or distrust. But from my general experience, the unknown logo is much more distrusted, which is why, of course, we do awareness raising campaigns are basically breeding trust through familiarity, right? But that's not your, like, say, your integrity or so. And people will feel the integrity. Like I told you how an integrity judgment comes from quantitative studies. So it's also an area where there's a lot of debate, and there will be a lot of opinions. To my knowledge, no one has fully figured out how to. There's no tactic for establishing credibility and trust better than being credible and trustworthy. And when it comes to the most dishonest of humans, a lot of people think that the most effective scammers lie to themselves. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Wow. It's hard to know, but I think they lie to themselves. But I don't know. Mind reading is probably close.
Yeah.
But we're not yet there.
That's very interesting. And how do you think? Well, you said they lie to themselves. about the story they tell themselves, or maybe they manage to convince themselves that they are doing something ethical while deep down they know that it's not ethical what they're doing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, to lie to yourself, it's like you have to frame every situation so you're always the hero or the victim,
Okay.
and other people are always like the aggressor. And so, well, being the when you, I did actually happen to know up close a person who was, I would describe as a textbook narcissist, but I don't work, I don't provide clinical services. That's not my area. I've gone to court as an expert witness, but not as a psychological expert, more like behavioral science and technology, but not. But one person I was convinced, used to tell me stories about how he was a victim and he was being taken to court and all things. And then I started realizing he was actually the aggressor. It was too sick and distorted, and Orwellian, and it's reality. Um, but they're very persuasive and they're very effective. But that's why people are distrustful, and that's why when you try and establish it through integrity, you have a lot of very distrustful people who have unfortunately been burnt many times. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe one last thing on it is that I still believe the truth will set you free, and building everything from an honest core of integrity will always win out in the long run. And yes, you will watch those pathological liars in the market have success. And yes, it's annoying as hell, but if you stick to it with integrity and you maintain this as a policy in everything you do, it will be felt. It's slower, but the other thing is how much loyalty do you foster in the long run when you betray people, and how much loyalty do you foster when you deliver on your promises? And when you screw up and you honestly say, it's our fault, we're very sorry, and you fix it, they will still stick with you. So
True.
you can't go wrong in the long run, and just you got to accept some of the injustice of the world. But I think time is on your side
But
in the long run.
I love the points you're making though, because it's true. Or like you said at the beginning, is how can you show or how can you prove, integrity or not? I think deep down, you know what you're doing. Like you said, with return policies, trust policies, with everything you're doing is, are we being transparent with the way we're doing business because we really want the best for our customers? Or are we just trying to frame it in a sneaky way where, people might not know it? And like you said, at the beginning, it maybe sounds good. So the people that are lying or that aren't fully, that they don't have too much integrity, they might manage to convince a few people, but it's going to bite them later down the road compared to the ones where you're just honest. And I think then word of mouth starts to happen and it just builds and it builds. And like you said, if you mess up somewhere, you're just proactive, you're honest about it. I think it just in the long term, you're maybe too big to fail because your reputation is still intact because you build so many enemies, like one person and another one and another one. And throughout the course of maybe 5 years, you have an army of people that hate you.
Yeah.
You bring your company down. So sooner or later, they're going to get to you. And I don't think it's also pleasant to the short-term success of, lying compared to the long-term pain, stress, and struggle you're going to go through isn't always worth it. So I love the points that you made there. And I think that's probably the better way of doing it. So there's trust, there's integrity. What throughout the research you've done, what other emotions or important aspects, let's say, if we stay on the sort of website, optimization side, what other aspects or emotions can we use on websites to try and actually positively impact people?
Yeah. So, and we could probably put like, what we just discussed is like the core essence, because without those, you don't even get a chance to use anything else, because people have, like, you can't persuade somebody when they don't even trust you in the first place. So
those are the fundamentals. We got that.
So let's say we got that. We just discussed it. That's in place. Now we can build. Yeah. So there's not really like one answer. And this is where maybe the Wild West of psychology has to come out. And what you find when you work in the behavior change field is that um, there are so many different frameworks and models out there. And what you discover quickly is that certain models have been optimized for different domains of application. So, say, like a marketing landing page model, like you don't want to build a health app with the psychology that they're using, for instance. You don't want to build a financial coaching app out of that. You wouldn't want to run a social lobbying campaign with that, right? So everywhere you look, there's all these different models. So we could say, well, what's the challenge? And then there are a bunch of tools you might want to draw from. So 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 one thing is knowing your domain and what's like sort of the constellation of psychology. One thing, and then maybe just we could go into the psychology, but then just to add one other thing, it's not just that you have different models and constellations of psychology for different domains, but almost every area of application is a lifetime of specialization. So the tactical implementation of the psychological principles, it's a career. If you want to optimize, like say, learning management platforms, right? That's going to be the tactical implementation of the psychology around learning and keeping students motivated. If of course, landing page, you could spend your whole career. You could also only specialize in one domain of psychology in landing pages. Like you might just be like UX design is mainly cognitive psychology, whereas, say behavioral economics and cognitive biases, that's going to be, it's sort of similar to the UX psychology in that it's like a cognitive, but it's more based on people's judgments of things and how they do their math and how they make reasoning about things. And then you might have also motivational and emotional modeling. So you'll have like areas, say, motivational interviewing and trying to like fire up passions in people. So each of them are going to be specialists. And then you have also models. So there's actually what people don't realize is, some people think behavioral economics is big and maybe, conversion psychology is big or behavioral design, but actually gamification is much bigger than a few. Wow. Those ones. Yeah. Yeah. If you look at like at least every time I've looked at the stats, gamification has been more popular. And so gamification is very similar in its psychology to coaching models. And so there's a lot of gamification specialists, and they're very good at the tactical translations to all sorts of different domains. So now we have a problem. What domain should we go down?
Exactly. Yeah, it just sounds so that you mentioned it before with, what kind of different trust can you use? We're going to cover, colors as well a little bit later. But when we had our call, last time, what I'm seeing here is how important context actually plays. Because what maybe works on one website or with one store is completely different depending on the context. Or like the branding, you also said having a very sort of professional, sleek design may work really well for a high-end fashion store or luxury bags. But if you're maybe a kid, toys, those kind of things, you want a bit more of a fun, not unprofessional, but a little bit sort of less perfect, optimized. So I find it super interesting how important context actually plays, which just requires people to do more research on their specific situation, which is maybe why people want to find, that the sort of one size fits all design structure and everything. You said gamification. I would have never guessed that. Can you just, before going into what you were just going to explain, can you just go a little bit deeper into a gamification? Exactly what that means, and also how maybe you can use it on your store a little bit more to maybe increase motivation or to keep people engaged on it.
Yeah. So normally, like in conversion design, maybe it depends on how you look at it, because I think a lot of people in conversion design obsess over the landing page because that's obvious. It's an easy thing. You optimize it, and there's a lot of business around it. But conversion design, you could convert an entire you could optimize an entire funnel. So it's like are the ads driving sales, and are your like preliminary landing pages, and you take someone down a funnel. Gamification is a framework that makes more sense once someone's already in a product.
Right.
So it'd be on, say, conversion design for optimizing a product. So gamification, in its most basic principle, is the idea that you can take principles of video games and try and make products as addictive as video games. So you think of teenagers addicted to video games, and I went cold turkey from World of Warcraft something like 20 years ago
Yeah.
because it was destroying my life. Oh, and then StarCraft. Oh, that was like
I also
horrible.
had my couple years of doing only that, missing out on homework, not going out and just playing video games. So I can agree with how addicted they can get. So I could understand how it also works on online stores. If you can gamify it or just online, I could 100% understand how big an impact it actually has.
Yeah, well, I mean that was the hope for a lot of products. I can, and if anyone has been to like the depth of video games where it's like 6 a.m. and my skin looks white and I haven't gone to the washroom. I think I'm going to have a heart attack. Or like, okay, so there's a design pattern in there.
It
Um,
works. It
I-
works definitely.
yeah, and so researchers started analyzing it and trying to figure out what are the different principles that can be extracted and pulled out. And they found a number of like basic principles, and they developed all sorts of taxonomies on it. And so then they started putting it into different products. And the idea is that it's more for optimizing a product, not optimizing the marketing. A lot of people have tried to bring gamification in the marketing and things, and sometimes there's games and novelty, but I don't know if I would call that gamification because it's
Right.
not. It's not quite. Gamification is more like a ongoing process
Okay.
that's pulling you into a loop. And when you program video games,
Right.
pro, like video games have a loop that you actually build into it. There's sort of a logic, and you get sucked into it. Um, so there's game elements, but gamification is a framework where you have goals that a person is trying to achieve. There's challenges. They have to develop a skill level to be able to overcome those goals. They're getting rapid feedback on their progress. There's tons of behaviorism in it. So if you do the good thing, you get rewarded. If you get the bad thing, you get punished, right? And they're also built on the psychology of flow from the researcher, I think it's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who came up with the idea that a flow, that if you can find the right balance between a person's skill level and a challenge, right?
Yep.
You can slowly increase the challenge as they increase their skill level,
Right.
and then you can lock them in. And that's where you have a really pleasurable, enjoyable experience. But if it's too hard a video game, people get stressed out and they want to leave. And if it's too easy, they'll get bored. So in the design of a gamified product,
Yeah.
you try to bring this in, which I mean, that's obviously easier in video games than it is with a lot of products, but people will borrow as many of the concepts and I'll bring it in. Oh, but maybe there's one funny thing on this. I did a study on backfiring psychology, where you use. I did this with Professor Stybye when he was at MIT at the time, and we looked at what causes the misapplication of psychology, where you cause harm to people or you destroy your product by misapplying psychology. And gamification was full of very bad, dangerous psychology, like leaderboards, where the top of a leaderboard is a nice status thing, but guess what? Someone's at the bottom. And what do you call that? The loser board. And then you're publicly shaming people if you do a botched implementation. So not very motivating.
I can remember when I was playing at the top of the leaderboard, you feel good, but when you're at the bottom, you just want that screen to disappear as quickly as possible because you don't want to be embarrassed. So yeah, I could understand. What other examples do you have where it actually sort of it can backfire?
Yeah, so that was one. A lot of the problems had to do with social psychology, because social psychology is maybe one of the most important area. And there's people use the word social proof like it's like there's all of social psychology is social normative influence. I know
Okay.
Cialdini would not, he
Yeah.
doesn't accept that social proof is a social norm, but
Mhm.
I've tried to measure it and I can't split that hair that he says exists. Again, my friend, Professor Steibe, his area of research is in a social influence. And there's a whole bunch of different social influence techniques, and each of them can backfire pretty easily. So, like say you model, like say you're showing people bad behavior you don't want them to do,
Yeah.
you might actually be establishing that as the normal behavior. Um,
Okay.
when when you do it. So like if you're running a campaign to try and get people to not pollute and you
Yeah.
focus on the bad polluters, you can do that. Um, if you use contemptuous language with people rather than polite language, and you deem someone bad for speeding or doing the bad thing, they'll sometimes do the opposite
Okay.
and they'll speed instead of. If you have any tailoring algorithms or automation,
Mhm.
you can screw up in three ways. You can collect bad data. So you're basically, so you've got a garbage in, garbage out algorithm. So if you're trying to do a tailored system, so a lot of like the A/B testing platforms turned into quick and dirty tailoring algorithms, right? So it's like, oh, if a person's from this country, then give them this sort of national
Okay.
flavor to
Yeah.
the product, or if we know their age, sex, gender, like any demographics come up custom content. So if you collect bad data, you're going to have a worse judgment. If you misclassify people, it's going to be bad. And then the final content you put out will be junk. So it's like misdiagnosis and misprescription are very common. And what the research shows is that personalization, or what scientists call tailoring, is more effective, but mistailoring is less effective. You can mistailor people in a way that causes them to do the bad behavior. So if you accidentally include social norms, the classic is, say, from there's one that maybe I overuse, but it's one I picked out early on. If say you're optimizing a health product and you want to tell people that they're drinking a bit too much and maybe they should come down,
Yep.
if you don't build it right, you might have people where the message is you're drinking less than everyone else and you should drink more alcohol. And then you're setting a norm. Hey, everyone else is drinking more than you. What's
Okay.
wrong with you? I found this in scientific papers and I started telling people about it. It's like, look at this. There's these scientific products for health that are causing unhealth.
Yeah. Because if it works well, like you said, if the message is tailored to the right person, it can work really well. But if it's to the wrong person, or like you said, it's mistailored, then it has a complete opposite effect. And it makes the person think, I'm not drinking as much as I should. Let me up the dosage, let me have another
Yes.
bottle. So I think, yeah, it must be very difficult. How do you think then that you find the sort of right balance where if you're personalizing, or if you are doing those kind of tests where you're giving like a threshold, or depending again on the context, how do you find that sweet spot of it actually being effective without it being counter effective?
Yeah, so I think the first is to treat psychology a little bit like a loaded gun, and saying that like even the best people in the industry are like they have a lot of either theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, or a healthy mix of the two. But most people won't call it like on the first shot, like anything that's sort of complex and it's new terrain. You have to do a lot of testing. So basically, the A/B testing is and all the market testing is going to help you find this. And one is to just be humble and have the attitude, we're probably going to have backfires. Like it's just unavoidable. And you mentioned one that I didn't mention, and that's where the wrong audience gets your message, so it's like you send a message for one group, but it goes to another, and that happens a lot in marketing, like especially online marketing, because it's like, there's a correlation in like some like ad platform. Like if I target people like this, like you never get a perfect serving to exact, right? Like that would be nice. It doesn't exist.
Especially at the start, when you're trying to understand product market fit, the right messaging, you might be way off, which can be harmful.
Yeah, and then you figure out your product market fit, and part of that is knowing how to target them in the ad platforms based on however they segment. And sometimes it's like we're getting 3%, and that's as good as we'll get, but it's enough to have a successful ad campaign on. Like yeah, so you always have a big miss ratio. So it's just like be humble, and look out for it, and just consider part of the optimization process in conversion optimization is fighting de-optimization, which is always like, it's always there, and that's just part of the job. It's as much about putting in the right things as taking out the wrong things.
True. And I'm just thinking, optimization is already a complex topic, but if you think of how can I make sure I'm not de-optimizing, it's just adding even more, things to consider. But it's very important because if you're not careful with that, it can be just very harmful, like you said, the results people get or the messaging you have. So you were mentioning that gamification was one that just had massive impact. What other sort of findings did you get when it comes to maybe emotions or cognitive biases or just things you can use on a website to impact people's behavior? What else did you see?
Yeah, well, maybe we could go to one that's like one of the most basics a lot of people ignore, and they don't really think of it as psychology, and that's user experience design.
Okay.
So I think of user experience design as cognitive psychology. So it's the psychology of how people process information. They're the mix between emotions and cognition is, it's I don't think it's as clear cut.
Okay.
But anyways, we segment our subjects as such. So just as trust is the prerequisite for being able to do other things, so people hold on. User experience design is a prerequisite that people can even interact with your content and your products. Because if you fail on that, you also don't really have very much because you have an unusable product, and so that's often overlooked. It's maybe it's treated a bit more like engineering, and the metaphors in some of the UX areas, like say information architecture, right, have analogs to like architecture and the construction of physical buildings, but also physical products. So it's a lot like product design as well. And so there, what people learn how to do is to communicate clearly, to make things intuitive, to design products in the way that humans understand products. And their arsenal of tools are absolutely fundamental. And if you have that established, you can go on and do other things. But I often think, why would you motivate someone to use a product that they can't figure out, right? Like what's the point, right? And why would you build a product that's so intuitive with the best user experience design that no one even wants, right? So you definitely need to have these two dimensions covered.
I'm thinking because let's say most online stores, they might look very similar when it comes to maybe you have a homepage, then you have a collection page, then you have the product page. So maybe most people, they would be comfortable or they could use the website the way it needs to be used in order to complete their purchase. Yeah. So then maybe you need to go into motivation, again, trust, that we mentioned.
Yeah.
But what are, again, with your experience, what are some maybe UX design mistakes you've seen even like the most basic websites make? And why is it so harmful actually to make those mistakes?
Oh. Yeah, actually there's a few, and I always I sort of use them in a bit of a cheeky way, because there's a few say cognitive screw ups that I see all the time, and you fix them and it's like instant product fix. So I can sort of roll in as like a superhero and give people some advice. And it's like, yeah, pretty much guaranteed it will help. So
Please share. Which ones are
if
those?
you,
I want to come in as a
oh,
superhero as well.
yeah, they're pretty simple. So one are, and actually it's sort of funny because one is actually not entirely a credible area of psychology, and that's Gestalt design. So
Okay.
like a lot of people like Gestalt, but um, it's not entirely respected in the psychological community, but it's very much respected in the design community. And I think the reason is that the Gestalt visual design principles are considered more descriptive of how humans perceive the world rather than being based on a coherent theory. And psychologists want their theoretical framework that they can use to predict the world. And if you just describe things accurately, people say, okay, well, I mean, that's helpful, but it's, not a scientific theory that we can roll with. And the Gestalt theories have been trashed a bit. But I think their descriptive principles of design are excellent. And so I am a Gestalt fascist. I will insist that everything follow them to the T. Basic things like enclosures, separation of space and white space between elements. If two elements are conceptually related, they must be physically related. I also I design everything, and this is also where, say, information architecture. I build everything on trees and navigational hierarchies. So people say mobile first. I actually go with something even more intense. I think we can do assistive technology first, and that if you can design for a blind person, your technology, everything will be super machine friendly and intuitive. So that means following a very strict hierarchy of we've got level 1, level 2, level 3, and then level 1.1, level 1.2, and so on. And everything follows a tree. Now, in visual design, you can take that and put that into a two-dimensional map where everything follows a certain layout. Then that can squish into mobile following a sequence. So the same pattern that you use if you make a screen reader, you can use it in any product. And when Elon Musk finally rolls out Neuralink and makes it cheap enough for the rest of us, I think you'll be able to navigate products with your brain using these simple frameworks. Right. So let's get it future proof.
Yeah.
And help people with assistive tech. I did one project a few years ago for the government of Dubai, and I'm still technical, so I program and still do a lot of the hands-on. And I had full developers and designers, UX people that I was managing. But for the jobs, like, okay, I'm going to do the usability, sorry, the accessibility, and I coded up, and I was the one who technically implemented all the accessibility standards or so. And that was actually a good catch up because I'm not like when I was younger, I was way more hardcore technical. So, but if I could take on a small tech role, I don't mind it.
Sounds like it was an interesting project.
So that was very helpful, and it made the whole product much cleaner as well. The point is that if you follow the Gestalt design, there's maybe a few other principles that are easy. So that's like Gestalt. Number 1, hierarchies. And match your navigational system. So information architecture instantly makes products more usable, right? Those good principles. The other are, and this is maybe more in the area of color, but pre-attentive processing. So having strong contrast, colors that pop out. Like, there used to be those conversion debates: is red the best button color, not? And then the consensus is no, it's contrast. That's the factor. But pre-attentive processing is on the psychology of how you can make things stand out or sort of fade to the background and not be noticed. And that gives you control over what you're serving people and when, so you can guide the eye with perfect control. Those are a few. Yeah, and of course, process design and information architecture will go in, but you combine those, and normally you can make a lousy product instantly intuitive.
So let's say you're browsing on a website and you see that the colors aren't really contrasting, or in terms of the design, it's not really following, the principles you mentioned, or even if the information is just difficult to find or it's not intuitive. When you see that, okay, we've got a couple of quick winners here that instantly are going to improve the overall experience for people. Is that sort of how you go about it?
Yeah, or you see the violation. So like an example of like if the main call to action button also looks like their notification bar or something like that, then it's like, okay, it's not popping out. And if the colors aren't contrasting enough, there's the old actually it's an old conversion optimizers trick that what you do is you squint your eyes to see what color pops out on the screen. That's one of the cheap tricks for seeing it, and that gives you a quick and dirty sense of what's contrasting the most, the squint test.
And the CTA is supposed to pop out most then, right? Or the important button is supposed to still be the most visually dominant when you do that test.
Yeah, and it depends also on the process. So I normally would design my buttons with different levels of salience, or salience is the technical term, but attention grabbing. So what pops out the most. So I'll have like regular processes, but then I'll have mission critical money earning processes, right? Like your business won't survive if people are not clicking on that button enough. And those ones should be the highest contrast, right? Like, because you just don't want people to be lost.
Okay, so is that maybe in a very sort of small scale, training people to behave a certain way? Like when they see a color, they know, okay, this is a purchase button, this is an actual, like, I'm going to make a transaction button, and other buttons is like, okay, this is just for more information, for example. Are you training them in a way where that's how they respond, even though it may be just per website basis and every website has different colors? Is that the little sort of experience they're going through when they're on the website?
Yeah, now that's one I use, but not everyone follows that. So that's sort of baked into some of the major template systems that you'll find online. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely do follow that approach, and I avoid template systems that don't bake that into their systems. And I specifically apply classic behaviorism to this, where it's like a certain color always serves a certain function, and so you have some sense of what's going to happen next based on the color. So the color is communicating, and you got to watch color blindness and what happens when blue blocking filters might turn on someone's like desktop or their app, because you could lose your contrast stuff. But so you find the right colors, and then you have a consistent meaning. And perhaps the most basic system is like primary secondary is a pretty common one baked into a lot of template systems. Primary is like the most important one, so that might be your money button or your main process. I'll typically have a primary, a secondary, and then I'll have a danger for like deleting content. Like if you press this, you're going to regret it unless you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
I think that's good as well. I think a lot of the things you're mentioning, I find there's not the most common stuff, you always see online, where it's like just have maybe 3 bullet points at the top, or just the classic stuff you see everywhere. But it's maybe also things that you don't consider. But if you do consider it and you do see it as a potential win, like you said, if the call to action looks exactly like the quantity selector, but it also looks a lot maybe like a piece of information later on the product page, it doesn't stand out as much as it should. So I think those are very interesting elements people can look into when they're looking at their website, and it gives a fresh perspective. So I love that. And I hope that everyone listening is just thinking about their website, like, actually, I didn't consider this, or maybe the images or the colors, can change and get the attention a little bit differently. So I love that. I think if we switch it up a little bit now, and we talk about something that, we briefly touched upon our first call together, which was the Pavlovian techniques of brainwashing. So completely different, but I think it is just very interesting. So if you can, for whoever that doesn't really, or who isn't really familiar with it, just give a sort of brief explanation and why it could be just an interesting thing to know when it comes to, psychology, influence, and all of that.
Oh yeah, sure. And then we can also take it back to the websites, because some of the psychological torture techniques are actually used in real torture by states. In some ways, people use them in web design all the time. Obviously, not to the same degree, but you don't want to be moving anywhere close to that.
No, let's avoid that. So what exactly is it?
Yeah, so the idea of brainwashing is that's maybe a term that was used to describe some of the techniques that came out of the application of Pavlov's theory. So I understand that I understand that Lenin wanted a hand with Pavlov on how to get the average Soviet to buy into the ideology. And so his teachings got taken into the state. And one of the concepts that he had was on that later, it became called brainwashing, but it was the idea of the opposite of reinforcement learning. So in reinforcement learning, we're told classic conditioning. Sorry, that was BF Skinner. Sorry, but of Pavlov's idea of classic conditioning is that you can teach an animal to be conditioned to a certain event, and we do that in interactive design all the time, where you try and take a color and you associate it with a certain outcome, and then you get your user to click on the button that leads to some positive thing that they want, and then when they see the button, they know it leads to a process and stuff. So you make the association. The idea of reversing that is that Pavlov had come to the idea that if you can induce stress in a person, and he was doing studies on dogs, then you can cause it to unlearn. And then the idea of brainwashing was that if you can expose a person to extreme stress, then you can cause them to unlearn something, and then you can re-educate them after. So this idea, can you wipe the brain clean and reteach people, right? So wonderful technique for state control. And the way they did that, and this is actually important for design, is understand what Pavlov would do is he would show a dog one image, right? And it might get a reward for this, or a punishment. And it would see something else and get a reward or punishment. And then it would see something in between, and it wouldn't know, am I going to get rewarded or punished, right? So you would have the reward, in the punishment case, and then something, I don't know. And then that uncertainty about, is this going to be good or bad for me, causes anxiety. And you can sort of play around with that until you bank up extreme levels of anxiety. And so what I think he was essentially doing was inducing what in lay terms you would call a nervous breakdown, even though nervous breakdown is not a psychological term, right? Which is probably a sort of a form of induced, PTSD. So it's inducing anxiety disorders. And then, this was taken into, government programs. I actually just got a book called Dark Persuasion that's writing on this. So I have to, I'll be taking that on my next trip as I start reading into the details of it, where the author of this has gone through in detail. I'm actually just recounting knowledge that I have from 30 years ago. I read something like this. This is when I read this information. So I'm a little fuzzy, and I'm up for an upgrade on it. But the main point is that you can induce extreme stress with ambiguity. Anyways, when it comes to design, that's one reason why I consider, of all the crimes of design, ambiguous design is probably one of the worst. So anytime someone's in a situation where, when I press on this button, is all my crypto going to disappear, or is it going to do what I wanted? Right.
That's stressful. That's stressful.
You want to know what's going to happen next. And a lot of products you don't actually know. Like there's so many processes. So pressing a button on a process should not be Russian roulette, right?
No.
But or there's probably some, I don't know what the proper game is, because it's between getting shot and getting some insane reward, right? Like it's like the best and the worst, and I don't know what's happening. I think it's the good one, but maybe it's not. And so a lot of products are actually designed like that, and that's just lousy product design or process design or conversion design.
Is that maybe, like you said, you get the reward where you get maybe dopamine from it? And then I don't know what the opposite one is. It maybe cortisol when
Yeah.
you get the negative effect of it. So which one would you say is maybe more, I wouldn't say motivating, because no one's motivated, to get the punishment. But what's the one that maybe works best when it comes to online design? And obviously you don't want to induce stress, but the one that makes people act the most? Is it the one where they want to continue with the process because they're going to get the reward? Or is it the one where they want to finish the process because they know they're not in that ambiguous state anymore and they're not going to get punished? Which one affects behavior most?
Yeah, actually, I love how you frame that. So, and I used to adopt your position, and then I had a few experiences that changed my point of view on this. Okay. So stress is not a bad thing. It depends. So is it the stress of an uncertain threat in the future, or is it the stress of the certainty of getting away from a threat in the past?
Yeah.
Or of getting away from a threat. So it's not that I have uncertainty that I'm going to get the threat. I have maybe a little uncertainty. Will I get away from it? Assuming you most probably will. So some stress drives you forward, right? Other stress stops you from going forward, right? So let's distinguish those. I used to be a very nice, polite Canadian in all my design. I would never use any stress or pressure techniques. I considered it, not nice. Even though I know these techniques very well. Often my morality is the worst thing working against the effectiveness of design. Of course, that also wins you tons of trust, so that's fine. But should you use a little bit of stress? And I discovered that while interviewing people, that everyone I interviewed when I was doing research on stress in organizations said that they were okay with being put under stress as long as it was honest and it was legitimate. I did discover out that you've used a stress induction technique on them to motivate them. That's not true. Rather than a motivational technique, that's not true. So if you promise rewards you don't deliver, that's not as bad as if you promise threats that you don't deliver. So
it's almost possible to not get the threat, so it's almost a good thing to not get that apparent threat.
Yeah. It's like the fake 24 hours deal, right? Like it's like, no, it's actually not running out. Sorry, we lied to you, right? Like
then you're happy the next day to see that it's running for another 24 hours, then you're happy. But then maybe at that point, sorry, just to interrupt real quick, then maybe at that point, trust is gone because you're like, oh, they don't promise or they don't maintain on the promises they make. Is it really going to be a 2-day shipping? Do I really have that 30-day guarantee? So you gain the fact that you're not worried about losing the deal, but you maybe lose the trust. Is that what happens?
Yeah, exactly. So you cause, put it as brand damage. So you destroy trust in the brand or trust in the people behind the brand. Yeah. And that's the problem. So that's like, call that the misapplication of stressors to motivate people. So my answer maybe to the prior question is I always include both. So you want to have a thing that you're offering people that they get and something bad that they're removing. And the two together work on two separate motivational systems. And motivational systems can cancel each other out. So you can have mixed emotions that put you into a dilemma. Like, we have the term a catch-22, where it's like, damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. So I just won't do anything. Yeah. But you can have, I'm damned if I don't, and things are going to be pretty good if I do. So maybe I will do this. So you're getting away from bad and you're getting to good. So it's like double the force. So
yeah, exactly.
And if you do it with integrity and honesty and then it's fine. And I think the arsenal of pressure techniques are, they're going to come down to a lot of emotional pressure techniques that we could broadly call loss aversion, although I don't like the word loss aversion, because I call it like threat avoidance, I think is a much better term. Because loss aversion is detached from the full motivational context.
Yeah.
Like people just treat it as like this technique floating in outer space, but it's like, no, loss avoidance and goal achievement, or or sustainability, or the achievement of something valuable. We don't actually have a proper win achievement. You get something of benefit and you lose something that was harmful, is maybe a better way to put it.
I like the way you reframed that. Yeah, definitely. I think that makes more sense. And I also love what you just said, where ideally, if you can motivate to get that reward and motivate to go away from the threat, it's a sort of, you're getting pushed and pulled at the same time. Oh no, actually not, but you have that double win.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of when you actually had, like a successful test, for example, where you were getting closer to that reward, but you're also going away from that threat, then it actually worked well? Do you have an example?
Actually, years ago, just in my company, because obviously, because I do training on behavioral science, I also have fun with my ads. I use everything I teach, and I sometimes, because I have a pretty warped sense of humor, is I'll make all these ironic ads where I'm discussing the technique while I'm using it at the same time. So I would do all these like loss aversion ad whole campaigns, and sometimes you can, if you take a technique to the extreme, it becomes sort of cheesy because it's so obvious. Yeah. Right? You never want to get caught using behavioral science.
Okay.
Is my rule. But if you do use it overtly, you can get a bit tongue in cheek because everyone can see what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I used to run loss aversion ads and goal achievement, and the loss aversion ads actually almost always, they outperform a little bit.
Okay.
So you would see that quite clearly, and then of course you will combine them. And so if you get the right, incentive and loss, and you can artistically work them in to the same witty concept, then you see an even better pump. And so, but there's also maybe one thing that you'll see is if you overdo the loss aversion techniques, because they are stress inducers, you run the risk of being like the boy who cried wolf, because you're basically fear mongering. At this point. So, and some of them you can't even take seriously. Some of the threats that marketers offer, like, I'm going to go bald, or I don't.
Doesn't make sense. No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think again, it depends on the context. What level of threat or scarcity or loss or even reward can you use? Does it make sense, or is it just obvious that you're just trying to scare people, but it doesn't even work? Like you said, if you don't take this product, you go bold. Most people, they know it's like, this is bull, this isn't going to happen. And again, you lose the trust then, because you're like, whatever they claim to help with, you're losing it. So I think, like you said before, it's about when you're trying to tailor your messaging, you're trying to personalize it, you're testing and you're seeing a little bit what works and also what doesn't. So again, I think that makes a lot of sense. If we talk about now something where we briefly touched upon it, but I think it's a very, very interesting topic, is colors. How important colors are and the impact it actually can have. What's your experience then when it comes to colors? And again, we mentioned how important context is, because maybe red in one context, it can be romantic, it can be love, it can be positive, but it also has maybe that aggressive side where it's violent, blood, and all that. So what's your experience with colors, and how important and impactful actually can colors be on a website?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I could just start by mentioning one of the main lessons of my doctorate, and it wasn't the obvious lesson, is that people do judge books by the cover.
Okay.
And we make a lot of superficial judgments, and we assume things are a certain way because of how they look and feel and smell, and that, and those physical sensations, that sort of sets someone up for discussing product design.
Okay.
And colors are something that we have on like interactive digital products. They also go into physical products as well. All, architecture, all sorts of things in the built and physical environment. And so, yeah, so color is something that's all over the skin of so much. So, yeah, there's like a number of lessons on color, but it depends on how you use it. So we can look at it in terms of different types of applications, and there's a few also interesting theories that are worth mentioning. They can help us with cognition. So just for clearly expressing ideas, helping people understand things, helping them understand processes, and making products that are more intuitive, websites, conversion funnels that are more intuitive by having consistent colors and creating the right learned associations with them. We can also use them to evoke emotions effectively, for knowing how we doctor photos of people to create a certain look and feel, to understand how people will be reading into certain design patterns of certain colors that we might want to use to evoke a certain type of feeling in a certain context.
Yeah.
We can use it. Okay, I working on a book now, and I designed into like a number of challenges. So it's like, I could go like in like a lot deeper, and I was just wondering, I should probably stop it here, but we could. Oh, maybe how about this? Maybe one other area. I think data visualization is also a very interesting area of helping people to have instant comprehension of quantitative concepts, and using it almost like a language that's more intuitive. And that's not the colors per se, but that's more the qualities of light and color.
Okay. Can you give an example just of data visualization of how you would approach that, so it's actually easier to visualize it and just easier to understand?
Yeah. So probably the most interesting, I think, associations that I found with color and data visualization was work that I was doing. And I have to apologize, I did study philosophy when I was younger. But if you actually look at the number systems that underpin all of science, they came from a paper, I think it was in the 1950s, on the levels of measurement, where we have things like nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio numbers. And I know a number of people are like, what are you talking about? So that's something you'll typically learn that in university stats classes,
Okay.
and above. And so those are different ways of how you can represent numbers. So like a nominal is like, think of numbers as a sports team, right? You wouldn't say player 1 plus player 4 equals player 5,
Yeah.
right? So they're the numbers are representing categories. So we can think of colors as representing categories, right? The ordinal is like a ranking. So you might have the top, like think of a leaderboard. So who's like the first player, whatever, scored the most goals, second most goals, third most goals, right? And the difference of goals is different, but they're ranked in order. And then you could go into, so let's just say interval and ratio are where we have normal number scales that go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then in the other ratio we could go -1, -2, right? So these are different ways of representing numbers, and they actually manifest in all sorts of ways in which we communicate. So there's some pretty basic rules. So we use color different types of colors are for representing different categories. So you might have 5 categories of things, and if you give them all a very distinct hue, a different color, that aids memory. For order, normally you want to take one dimension. So you wouldn't have different colors because that's going to confuse people. So you take one color of green and go from bright green to light green or something like that. And now the concept of intensity can be expressed with color. right? You have the concept of positive and negative numbers, and you can have a positive, whatever, your green, and negative, your red, and now you can express, your stocks are up, your stocks are down. We have positive and negative correlations with those. Um, and there's one other thing. This is actually probably very important for like conversion design and all design. Um, Most people don't know it, but the color systems used on templates and visual design systems online are fundamentally different in their philosophy from those used in data visualization. They're actually, you cannot build a data visualization um, product
Yeah.
from basic RGB color pickers. The trichromatic color model does not match human perception, or at least the color wheel that they use in it.
Yeah.
It matches. It's a system for physics, not for human perception. There's things called C-Lab, or and there are systems used for integrating color systems that unfortunately we don't properly have in digital environments that are perceptually balanced. And so when you move your colors in these, they feel intuitive. So you understand the numerical difference intuitively. But so most people can't even implement this properly because the entire infrastructure was designed, unfortunately, by Microsoft and HP, who did not consult neuroscientists and psychologists when they built the color specs. And for that reason, I'm discussing something that needs to come that is not yet here. But so if you use data visualization color systems, you will have an intuitiveness that you just will not get with these other lousy trichromatic like systems that we're using. And when you do it, the if you pick colors systematically, everything has a perfect harmony to it. Things look instantly balanced. When you show the idea of intensity, like this is more important and less important, see what we're stressing, you can push it back and forward into consciousness and make it salient or pull it back. And that is something that you'll get with like those ordinal scales or the gradual scales, but you won't get that with the RGB system so easily. That's why you have to pay a designer.
Yeah.
To try and go with their feelings, because they're going to compensate for the crappy infrastructure with their intuitive perceptual ability as a good designer. So that's maybe one interesting thing on design. I think actually, if our color systems were based on human perceptual, on perceptually balanced color systems, a lot of design would be more intuitive. Probably a lot of designers would lose their job as well, because the average person would be designing beautifully balanced products with little skill.
So what you're saying is that there are potentially a lot of websites that just have people, maybe designers, saying that they're just using good colors, but actually to the real colors that we can perceive with with our eyes, it's not really it's not really intuitive, and it's actually a bit counterintuitive. Is that what is happening on some stores, basically, you're saying?
Yeah, like a lot of the template systems have been calibrated by designers, or they're even using full they're just building off of template systems. Like if you say built a product off of, say, material design, like Google system, they already have like all these steps, and it's not perfect, but it's reasonably pretty good. So you're just sort of picking something, and they're automatically throwing in all the ratios in the right place. But if you do it yourself, and you're like, oh, let's just sort of move over, and now let's add a yellow. Now the brightness pops up, and and it doesn't actually match. Like an example is like the yellow that most of us know is actually not correct. So yellow is super bright. Like if you're to look at all the colors right on their brightness, when you get to yellow, so the normal yellow that we should be more like of a browny mustard color, like to match most of the other colors. But our color system is so like out of whack that it shoots up in brightness. And so if a rookie just goes say, "Oh, I want to like blend these," it's like why do the colors always look ugly together? Right? It's because you think you're taking systematic colors, but you're not. You're taking systematic colors from physics and the arbitrary color system. You're not taking it from a system that was balanced on the average perception of the average human of color.
Okay. I think that's very interesting, and I think that hopefully it makes people look at colors a little bit differently, and just think it through a little bit more. How can a brand, let's say, because potentially a lot of brands are using the wrong colors and the wrong combination of colors on the website. How, as a brand, can you approach this situation to just make sure that you're actually using colors to your advantage to build that trust, to visually guide people more instead of actually doing more harm? How can you approach that situation?
Yeah, so I see color design as a bit like you know in the Matrix when Neo was like dodging all the bullets.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like this. So you've got all these problems you're facing, and so you've got to make this really brutal balancing act decision. So
Right.
to come up with an effective color scheme, there's a number of criteria. So obviously, depending on where you operate, you're going to have different accessibility legislation or like industry norms, or in the future, it might come down the line and then you'll have to deal with it if you don't deal with it now. You've got to deal with the challenge of, oh, how will things work in blue blockers on like all sorts of screens when everything now turns orange? How is it going to work for colorblind people, potentially impacting up around 8% of men or so, roughly that. How is it going to work you know for our cognitive associations of like whether we fit in the appropriate product category and people instantly recognize us? Does it evoke the right types of emotional associations? Is it something that's like fostering trust? Do we have a color scheme that we can use to let less experienced staff design pages that are intuitive where they can't screw up too badly? Oh, now you have to worry about dark mode. So can we now invert it into dark mode and will it work perfectly? Maybe it won't if you haven't designed for this. And so there, and then you've got like all this internal politics and opinions you have to deal with. Like I feel sorry for designers. I've been in their role and I did not like it when I was younger.
It's a tough job, yeah.
So you've got to cut through all of this, and so your only option is to have a reasonable balance, right? There's no perfect solution. So I typically what I do is I design everything grayscale. I like a basic black, white, and gray type of template, and then that be inverted into a dark mode, right? So now you've got like the most basic type of human perception. And I think if everything you design actually works in grayscale, it's very usable, right? Like it's going to be a good system. And then what I prefer to do is to come up with accent colors that incorporate the brand. So then what that means is your use of color is only strategic. There's no visuals per se, except for your use of color is almost always to achieve something. And the way you compose it together is as a whole, that's now your brand colors and they're functional, right? So if you go for branding before functionality, I don't know what that's going to offer if you cause usability problems. So I'll try and balance that. And I developed a few tools for this, but one tool I did was I think I call it the color psychology map. And I basically take the color spectrum and I throw in different UI elements. And so you have the entire spectrum and you can mark off where color blindness typically happens, even though it could be all over, but you've got like the main danger zone. You've got blue blocker areas where like once blue blockers are on, that whole zone like gets taken out. And then you can try and play with your contrast ratios and all these different elements and play around in there. And that's how I do that neural thing of like getting shot with all the bullets. Because if there's so many criteria. And if you try and just design something and pass it around to a bunch of people for their brutal tests and it's out of context, you can't do it. So it's like, keep it in one place and you basically throw every brutal test against it in this one page where you can see everything. And then you can also design all your UI and see how they materialize in this. It's not. I built products for this on, and you're just pounding away with refresh loops and trying all these tweaks and all your tests. And then it's a balancing act. And once you get signed off, it's like no one can change the colors after because it's a nightmare scenario to get there.
There's been so much work, to make sure the colors work. But I find what you said, it just makes so much sense when you actually go from, you want to make sure that the colors work, and then you want to be like, okay, let's add some branding here if it makes sense. And I think it's something, maybe an approach a lot of brands don't take. It's more like, we want it to look good, and then it's like, okay, but does it work? And then you did all of that work almost for nothing, because the branding looks nice, but maybe on different screens, some people see colors differently. The branding doesn't work. So I love that you go for usability first, and then you add some of that branding to it, because otherwise it just won't work. And like you said, once it's sent off, the colors, you found that perfect match. No one touched the colors anymore, because then it just throws away all of the work you did. So that approach makes sense.
Yeah, and one thing I do with branding is the brand colors sometimes do put you into a corner, and it's like a lot of people have red brands. They're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Right? Like, because it's such a salient color. And then they think they have to paint their whole website red. And then they have contrast problems. And then their conversion design is a nightmare scenario. So in some cases, you'll want to, you put your brand in first, but not as the dominant thing, but more as the contextual setter. Yeah. And it's like, how can we manage it? I mean, one of the quick fixes is you use the brand colors, the high salience color. Okay. So it is your most aggressive color. And then sometimes you might even need to take down, people are sensitive about brand colors. So, but, to get that balance, sometimes, you could have like some brand with like this whole color palette that's not usable. And it's like, well, we got a problem because this was probably designed at a point when this was not an issue. And now you've got like a legacy branding problem, right? We're in the digital age. And if you want to carry it over, then you've got to accept the problem.
Sure. But there's
pass it off to the manager. This is our best judgment. Get the highest paid person. Okay, you sign on the dotted line. I accept usability problems because I want the brand. And I didn't quite get that extreme as a consultant, but normally I would let that be known that you're responsible for this and it's against our judgment that we should go down this road, but you're the paying client. And I think this will be harmful, but I make it in writing that they've decided this and we've warned against it.
I see, because there's also sometimes, I believe it's like ADA compliance, those kind of things that are super important. And if you don't respect that, maybe you have warnings, because you don't respect the sort of way people see them, the different colors. So I agree with, obviously, if it's your client, you cannot force them to use certain colors, but at least you've warned them. They're aware of the risk. But yeah, you've judged or you've suggested to go the other way. But if they prefer branding on top of other things, then yeah, at least you did, your part, which I think is really good. Another topic that I think is very, very interesting, and you've done a lot of research on it, you said recently, is the unity, the us versus them. And I think you mentioned something with the effect size, how big or how much of an impact it actually can have on people. Again, can you just explain that a little bit? And again, how brands can use it to their advantage, but how it also sometimes can backfire, because if you're using us versus them the wrong way, you're going to get people that love you, but you're also going to get people that are really, really deep with hate against you or your brand?
Oh yeah, yeah. This is also such an interesting subject. I'm backlogged on finishing my books, but I've got two I'm working on, and my third one will be in this domain
Okay.
if I make it there. Um, so this is a subject that has different names. So I think in marketing, you know you'll see some things on like tribal marketing, or so often maybe it's more commonly called value based marketing, right? Or sometimes cause marketing. So there's a bunch of different names, and it's the idea that if you take sides on a political issue or a topic of social relevance that, let's say, is political not in the left-right spectrum, but it's political in the sense of people cluster into groups and have strong feelings about, this is good, this is bad, and they argue with each other and throw mud at each other sometimes, right? There's some emotion there. So anytime you pick sides on one of these, um, you're going into the currents where you're going to have a lot of friends and people will trust your brand and they'll like you, but you will have enemies too. And there's tons of research on the political associations of brands, especially because America right now is so politically polarized. But so are a lot of their brands, which is one of the funny things. And so people have, oh, that's a conservative brand, and that's a Democrat. One thing that's also related to this that a lot of companies deal with is their brand voice. And if you want to speak to all people, so you probably have a lot of listeners and people in your network who maybe work with governments and or work with really big brands, and so you have to be all things to all people. And typically, people work in the communications department. Um, they sort of have a hard time because they have to write in this sort of general way. They can't really use too much in-group jargon. They can't really, use jokes or humor, and the brand voice is going to be boring because you're speaking for all people. But if you have a really niche business, you can speak the exact language of the group, right? And you can resonate with them. You can reflect their values and who they are as people, and you can build that type of connection that you'll get when you embrace, one group of people over another, right? And that, that's what marketing is. I personally, I think the only reason why marketing works is because it has this theory that if you put people into segments, you can send them a common message based on what resonates with that group versus the other group, right? But now you're doing that with your brand and you're segmented and all your content resonates. Boom, higher relevance. A lot of things come when you tailor. So when you go to anything that's hotly contested, though, and you go to that, you become loved and hated. And this is something that's actually not fully understood. And I think the marketers who deal with this, they're onto something. And they wrote about it from the perspective of their firsthand experience doing what they would call like tribal marketing. But now the science of us versus them and the science of the moral emotions that structure human behavior and human civilizations is now becoming a lot clearer. And there's more and more insight. And I started becoming interested in the moral emotions that flip with people when they're in any political group that defines an us versus a them, an in-group versus an out-group. We're the good moral people and they're the evil, unethical people. And what you will find when you start looking at the literature is that the more people are in a contrast and a tension with each other, the more they've been either naturally agitated just based on the intergroup relations, or manipulated to have demonizations of the others, to cause like hatred amongst groups. What happens is content and information becomes more and more radically polarized. And, and it's far easier to mobilize those communities to do things like related to the whatever the conflict is, right? And to also to get them to support you or to oppose you based on your general constellation of values. And the effect sizes that you will see on the ability of content to evoke emotions and the ability to engage people and to have an impact on their behavior, I would say it's in the order of magnitude of 5 to 10 times stronger than anything I've ever seen in the behavioral sciences. And I say that as a scientist who I published one of the statistical meta-analyses that measures the impact of behavior change principles, published in one of the top scientific journals in eHealth. So the numbers are massive. And this is part of what happens when you start engaging a community. You're basically mindlessly loved and mindlessly hated based on your branding and the issues that you pick up. And so it's something I always warn my students. If you want to do value-based marketing, be very careful, because you're going to have to deal with two sides of the spectrum, because you will potentially be the enemy to someone as you will be their greatest ally to another group. And so it's providing a lot more, it's shedding much more light on what happens, in the consumer side, right? I just described something that's used by, this is like used in revolutions and political unrest and, trying to have a big impact on social engineering of societies. Priming societies for the best possible world and the worst possible world. And unfortunately, that's what you get into when you do some value-based marketing. And some of it is a bit ridiculous, I think. Like say you do, say you have a pro-environmental, Ben, like the environment should not be political, right? Like it's, taking care of like carbon dioxide in our forests. I really don't understand how that can be a left-right issue, but unfortunately it is very much so. And so if you have a social enterprise or any like value-based business, certain topics that have made it into larger political discourse are things you just have to decide. Will we support this? Will we not? Are you going to stay neutral, or are you going to maybe make it part of your corporate, like if you have a sustainability plan or a social enterprise model? Is it something that you'll be supporting, or is it going to be front and center? And so,
I think two questions come off that. One, I was just wondering is, you said if you're a brand where you care about, sustainability, or you don't want to pollute as much, maybe, like you said, that's not directly maybe a left or right issue. Do you think maybe sometimes people try and make it so just to give them a reason to have a problem with someone or to love a brand more passionately, or is that not part of it at all?
They do. Yeah, I used to work with political lobbyists and activists and in fact, I used to, I spent about 10 years auditing global social lobbying campaigns in the United Nations and for some of the largest NGOs. So, and as an auditor, basically, I'm the person who will come in and say, okay, drop your pants. I need to look and see what's going on, right? Like I audit their finances. I would speak to all their staff from every level, from the top leadership to the front level tactical. So often I know how they work. And so a lot of the lobby groups, they try and be nonpartisan with their issue, because like if you're, say, promoting, policies on climate change, you don't want the left or the right to pick it up, because the problem is that if one political party picks up an issue and the other doesn't, the problem is that maybe for 8 years you'll have no impact, depending on how the political currents move. So a lot of the good ones try to be nonpartisan, because you actually harm the cause by pushing one political spectrum onto it. But sometimes they do that, or sometimes one party picks it up and then the other political party has to go for blood, and anything that touches anything tied to the other side will get demonized and pushed out, and then you'll be operating in a hostile political environment. Yeah, I don't know if it's the public as much as it's a combination of like lobbying and what the political parties themselves pick up.
Yeah.
But from my experience, political parties don't just pick up anything. They know that there's a voter base tied to things. Sometimes it's with their values, but often I don't think it's random. Like so yeah, so you've got to watch it a little bit, or you take a stand, right? It all depends on your company's values, and you know.
Well, that's what goes into my second question that I had, which was for a brand. You said sometimes you have neutral messaging a bit, or neutral stance, basically, because you don't want to piss people off. You want to just be like a good brand, maybe. For the smaller brands, right? Because like you said, when it's a very, very big brand, maybe it depends on the context. But if it's a very big brand, maybe they have to be a bit more neutral because they want to appeal to more people at the beginning. And again, maybe it's a dumb question because it depends per brand, per context, per industry, per everything. But would it be maybe good at the beginning for a smaller brand to be more fixed on a specific stand, to be more like, okay, we really hyper appeal to these people, we don't to another. And then as you grow, you start to appeal to more and more and more people, to the point where you actually appeal to everyone because you're a bigger brand now. Is that maybe a good approach for growth? Or again, does it depend?
Yeah, actually, from my experience, that can work very well. And there's a lot of niche issues that will have, like, you don't really have any like major opponents to them, right? They're or it's more or less like people generally, that's something important, right? It's not like you're going into like the political battlefield at all. So yeah, and absolutely, and that's also what happens when you hyper focus. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Elon Musk, he focuses, and I wouldn't call that a bad strategy, would you? you know, so yeah, so hyper focusing it can be very effective, and when you also tap into the values as well, you get this mindless instant trust. So that it's also one way of establishing instant trust. Like I used to find, and I always thought it was bizarre, but when I worked in social activism earlier in my career, I thought it was bizarre how everyone just instantly trusted me and would just boom, everyone would just open their networks. If you're from like the political left and you're promoting like an environmental cause with kids, which is one thing I was doing, like everyone just opened their doors for me and they were very supportive.
Right.
So you get that when it's like a good issue that's of general value to most people, and it's all about like knowing your market, right? I was doing that, but if I don't know, there's probably people that I don't know, they've got like there's things on other parts of the political spectrum, right, that would totally offend people, right? So as long as you're targeting it right and it's got broad general appeal, you're good.
I'm just thinking, you said at the beginning of how we judge people within seconds, like, can I trust this person? What do I think of their personality? And I'm just thinking that if people, let's say, one person is from the left and they know they're going to meet someone also from the left, they might be a lot more likely to actually like that person. And if they see, I might be wrong, but if they see traits, for example, of that person, they don't seem too trustworthy or they don't have a great personality, maybe we're going to try and convince ourselves like, oh, this is actually a good person because they're on the same side as I am. So is that also maybe what you mean when you say that you've never seen or it has like 5 to 10 times of a stronger effect, is because it maybe can override some of those negative personality traits just because you're on the same sort of page?
Yeah. So I don't have the research to answer that. I can tell you what I suspect. I could be wrong, but I think the greater the degree of polarization in the context, the more willingness people have to interact with people of a corrupted nature or
Okay.
or of a corrupted morality. So um, I think a lot of people are more willing to turn a blind eye
Yeah.
when their survival is depending on it. Most of us are not living in this type of context. Um, and I think also in the workforce, a lot of people understand that you've got to make peace with some pretty unstable humans just to survive in almost any political environment. Like, can when I joined the UN, I remember I reread Machiavelli's *The Prince and the Art of War* within a short period of time. He's like, I think I need a refresher now.
Be well armed to handle the situations better.
Yeah, like there's very good operators there, and you will not see the knives coming out. They're very sophisticated, so it's good to be mindful. So there's like managing relationships, and everyone's obviously different,
Mhm.
but I do suspect that in periods of heightened political tension, people are more willing to bend their moral rules.
Right.
um, but here's another thing, and this is a horrible aspect of humanity. Uh, I now largely believe this, and I think the literature is building on it. What we consider moral is only for our in-group. So when we want to protect humans, we don't actually want to protect humans. We want to protect our humans, but the demonize them humans, it's fine to harm them. That's perfectly acceptable. Loyalty is important, but the bad ones. They're not loyal, right? And we don't have to be loyal to them either, right?
Okay.
Like, and so what the research seems to be showing is that morality and in group versus out group are intrinsically linked. And there's no such thing as morality without in group, out group. They're hardwired and we cannot separate it. So the other perspective on the unethical person is that the unethical person is now someone who should be the leader if they're unethical to the them group. If they're unethical to the in group, then they're a problem. But if they're unethical to them, sadists, willing to lie to people, to do all sorts of crimes against other humans who are in the out group, then it's fully acceptable. And that's what I'm reading from some of the research. And so now let's take this back to business. So there's actually even science on this I found in the business sector. And it came to things like, so we know, like, whatever, you go in a Boeing airplane and wherever the doors fall off and it could fall out of the sky, right? And they're like, how do Boeing do this? So one of the, actually, this is the scientific paper I found explicitly on this. So
Okay.
one of the theories is that the in-group, out-group association to morality means that cheating in the industry is moral if it gives your company a competitive advantage, which is,
How does that
sorry,
work?
yeah, I found one paper on this.
Yeah.
And so they were saying that one of the ways you build a strong culture is with this in-group, out-group dynamic. We're competing against the other competitors, right? And so it's not like whatever, like a genocide, but it's like a economic marketing battle and product design battle. And then so people cheat because now cheating is moral, and so their morality starts bending. And so that's one of the things. I don't know if this could explain unethical marketing, but perhaps
Is
there's some extension there.
is that maybe also? I'm sure you've heard of the Stanford effect. I think there was even maybe a movie about it, the Stanford
What was
effect,
that?
where people, I believe the movie was about, they put a group of students inside a sort of fake prison, and there were the guards and there were the prisoners. And then at the beginning, it was a little bit fun and games. And after a couple of
Yeah.
days, the prisoners really started acting like prisoners. The guards really started using real violence against the prisoners because they were in that role. So maybe what that study proved basically was that when you're put in a certain position or a certain role, with enough time, passing by, you're actually going to start acting that way. So maybe that's what you also just mentioned, where you don't cheat, but if it helps your company get that competitive advantage, then apparently it's okay because it's good. It's again the us versus them. So I was just thinking if those two were sort of linked, the Stanford effect and the sort of us versus them unity.
Yeah, I know that a study, the Zimbardo study. Yeah, I went to Stanford once, and I drove by the basement where they did that.
Nice.
So yeah, I think that one came under some question. I didn't look in the details, but I know some of the research methods were questioned. But yeah, that is sort of like the process where they were claiming they got sadistic behavior and people were going way outside of their like normal moral behavior.
Exactly.
Um, I didn't look so deeply at like the questioning of its credibility, but maybe just in general, like the principle of like us versus them.
Yeah.
It's it's something we see like all the time. Research actually, and it also works in terms of customer loyalty as well, because you can give people squirts of oxytocin, um, and it has a small impact on us versus them behavior. So they've used it in a ton of studies, and it seems like loyal people can become more loyal with oxytocin spritzer up the nose, and people who are not favorable to a brand can become much more hostile towards it with
Wow.
a bit of
So
oxytocin.
it amplifies the effect they have.
And that's part of the clue that us versus them are intrinsically linked, because with oxytocin you can manipulate both effects at the same time.
I think it's so interesting everything you're saying because it uncovers so much where you think we're all moral people, we're doing the right thing, we have our values, but apparently I'm hearing now that under the right condition or the right sort of context, that sort of changes as well. So I find that just really really interesting, and I think another sort of question I have about that is, and I don't know how sort of directly linked or
Yeah.
correlated this is, but how much do you believe users are buying because of emotion instead of logic, even when they think that they are actually making a logical decision? Because like you said, the
Yeah.
oxytocin maybe it amplifies the effect you have for no logical reason.
Yeah.
When you make your decision to buy, how much is it based on emotion and how much is
Yeah.
it based on logic?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that question, because most people in the industry have stopped asking that, and they just assume it's all emotion right now. And I actually I'm still in between, so I haven't gone over entirely. So um, there's different perspectives. So I don't know if we call it old school, but you used to have like the rational model for decision making, right? And a lot of the early models in economics, not in marketing. Right? Marketing almost always had like emotional models, right? So it was in economics, right, where they had rational models, and then the behavioral economists came along with their irrational, like biased based decision making, right, which brought it more into towards emotions. And then you had all these studies from MRI showing that decisions were made, they are, whatever, 8 seconds before, something like that. Very long time frame before people actually made a decision. So it must all be emotion, and then we rationalize it intellectually afterwards. I think it depends on how you define logic and emotion. So um, I'm still somewhere in between. So I think, um, and I think it's more complex because our brain uses rational models to make emotional decisions that make sense given the quantitative nature of human judgments. So it's like emotions driven by quantitative processing. And maybe just sort of one last thing, I don't want to ramble too much, but we have that old philosophical debate of like sort of free will versus determinism. And that's still also here. Like typically those who argue like emotion, they're not just arguing emotion, they're saying, oh no, it's all predetermined, you're just this like emotionally driven mammal, and everything's just like a desire, right? And you're not like the intellectual human with self-control you thought you were. So So there's way more to it, I think, if you unpack that. Personally, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I think there is a quantitative nature. For me, reasoning is a form of quantitative processing of information. It makes sense. Emotion is normally a rational feeling of what you should do in a given situation based on what's most appropriate, right? And so there's a rational component to our emotions as well. So I like this model people don't talk about, the elaboration likelihood model, which talks about how, people will draw on like these two systems. So normally when there's higher risk, and you're really looking at something dangerous and there's a lot to contemplate, and people will normally kick the tires more. They're going to take a closer look. They're going to be persuaded by much more of the substantive factors. And then when people really don't care and it's just like a quick transaction, like emotion, or you call it emotion, but it'll be like superficial factors that drive it. So I'm sort of in between. I don't think we're these purely irrational driven things with no self-control. Others might not agree. And I use both as well.
I think it goes back again to context. It depends what you're buying. If you're buying a house, you're not just going to be a spur of the moment emotion, unless you might be Jeff Bezos and you've got billions and you're buying just a second home or something. Mm-hmm. And if it's just a small, quick purchase, maybe there's a lot less logic that goes into it because there's less risk and less danger as well. So again, I think it goes back to context. And I mean, I could just continue. I think we've been chatting now for 2 hours. Yeah. I think I could just add another 2 hours because they're just everything you say as well. It just makes me think, through a different perspective, or it just makes me think, like even simple things like colors, where I'm realizing it's not as simple. Or like I said, we think we have morals, but we don't. I think to sort of end it off, I think it's nice if we ended up on the sort of positive note, because we went through torture, went through brainwashing, went through a lot of very, very interesting topics. I think I've got some rapid fire questions to end it off. So I think it would just be nice to sort of end it on a happy dopamine note. Let's just put it that way. We're getting closer to that reward. Okay, love it. Let's go. So if you could instantly learn a new skill, what would it be?
Actually, I'm learning predicate logic. I'm doing all formal logic right now, and I'm working on it.
Okay, so it feels
classic Aristotle, all the way up to Bertrand Russell.
Okay. I didn't expect that answer, but I love it. If you could have dinner with any celebrity or public figure that is alive or that has ever lived, who would it be?
Oh, Aristotle, of course.
Okay. Who inspired, or maybe it's the same answer, but who inspires you the most?
I just read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and this has had a massive impact, I would say. I regret not reading it earlier.
So would it be a recommended read?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's concepts of Buddhism, ancient rational approaches, philosophy, so many concepts that you think that are modern, you cannot imagine that Marcus Aurelius describes them.
Okay, so I was wondering what kind of book I could read now, but I know what I'm going to read. I'll probably just pick up a copy of that one.
Oh. Yeah, you'll love it. You can't go wrong.
When you're not focused on, like digital psychology and basically everything we've talked about today, when you're not in work mode, let's say, what do you enjoy doing or learning?
Oh, I don't know when that is. Yeah, I'm always learning. Like for me, learning is not work; it's play. So, but I do live in Newfoundland, so I've been doing a lot of like trekking lately and seeing the island and out in nature. And also I have a house, so I do a lot of DIY. So I've been like removing rot wood, foundation repair, concrete work, wood, working with power tools to fix up a old room, gardening, landscaping. I'm like hardcore, and I like doing some electrical too.
Okay, nice. Okay, so you do have time sort of off work, but I like what you said where it feels like play to you because it sounds like you really found what you love to do, and it's not like I have to work. It's more like I get to do what I love to do. So love that. What's one thing you wish you knew earlier in your career?
Oh, well, I had mentioned it to you. Like, I think probably being a bit more humble and working a bit more agency side uh, would have been good. Learning earlier in my career, uh, actually, probably programming. I learned that later on. I should have probably learned it earlier. I think that would have been bad. I actually was taught it early, but I didn't stick with it,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Interesting answer. And then last question is, what up and coming trends are you most paying attention to at the moment?
Oh, well, AI is obviously, top there. I think we're falling out of illusion with AI right now. So that actually I like. So now the reality of it.
Mhm.
I I've sort of gone on to a different track, but the areas of like sort of morality
Okay.
and social structure is something I've been interested in. And I've been interested in the use of like AI and what's going to happen in the modern world in terms of like propaganda and large scale like influence operations, which I think are happening now on quite an epic scale because they're like very easy to implement. So I think the political domain, I think I might be moving more in this direction. So it will be on the use of behavioral science, but also the emotions of morality and how artificial intelligence in tools can use this to divide human populations or unify them. And from what I'm seeing, it's not looking good
Oh,
uh, for us. I think of all the AI threats,
yeah.
divide and conquer, classic Julius Caesar style, is something that they are very good at with in the hands of the wrong humans.
I think AI just generally could be an entire other podcast episode because it's so interesting and so many aspects to cover. Um, but even your rapid fire answer questions or your answers are just super interesting and valuable. Um, that's it, with the rapid fire questions. But I just want to thank you, Brian, for the time that you've given me today. Every answer was super super interesting, and like I said, I'm definitely gonna rewatch this episode a couple times, take notes as well, because so many things that you said, maybe I did. I'm sure I didn't even pick up on half of everything that you said, and I hope everyone listening also just took notes, and it just gives us a very fresh perspective on how to approach, psychology, just behavioral design, just everything. And I find it's very sort of outside of the box. It's not the mainstream stuff you see on LinkedIn or Twitter where it seems like everyone's doing the same. It just sounds so different. So that's why I just want to thank you for your time today, for the knowledge and the value that you shared. And for anyone that just wants to maybe get in touch or that wants to keep learning from you, what would be the best place for them to go to reach out?
Oh yeah, just the Behavioral Design Academy, and I put out content here or there.
Okay, love it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
hopefully I'll get a book out soon. It's been dragging on for some time.
Please let me know when, because I'd love to read it because I know it's going to be as interesting and as valuable as this chat we had. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Brian. I really, really do appreciate it.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, Chris. This was great. Thank you so much.